Blackwell's oath. Lady Eleanor of Ashbourne had once trusted Sir Tristan de Warwick with her heart until war took him from her. Now, as she prepared to wed another, he stood before her, his voice rough with something unspoken. "Did you mourn me, Eleanor?" he murmured. "Or did you pray I would never return?" Chapter 1. The Ghost of Ashbourne. The wind howled a mournful dirge through the battlements of Ashbourne Castle, mimicking the tempest that raged within Lady Eleanor. Autumn had painted the surrounding forests in hues of rust and gold, a vibrant tapestry that mocked the ashen pallor of her own reflection in the cold glass of the window. 5 years. 5 years since she had last seen the sun glint off Tristan's armor. 5 years since the king's banner had led him away to a war that had swallowed him whole. 5 years of silence, punctuated only by the hollow echo of a promise unkept. She traced the outline of a faded stain on the windowpane, a ghost of a raindrop from a long-forgotten storm. It mirrored, she thought, the ghost of Tristan that haunted these halls, these very stones. He was everywhere and nowhere, a phantom limb that ached with a constant, dull throb. The scent of wood smoke and leather, the clang of steel from the training yard, even the way the light fell across the courtyard at dusk, everything conspired to remind her of him. A shiver traced its way down her spine, despite the heavy woolen gown she wore. It was not the chill of the approaching winter, but the chill of memory, of a love that had blossomed bright and fierce, only to be seemingly extinguished by the cruel hand of fate. She had been barely more than a girl then, full of laughter and light, her heart brimming with a naive faith in the enduring power of love. Tristan, with his laughing eyes and easy confidence, had been her sun, her moon, her stars. Now, the stars were cold and distant, and the moon hid its face behind a veil of clouds. A soft knock on the chambered door startled her. "My lady?" It was Agnes, her handmaiden, her voice laced with a familiar blend of concern and gentle chiding. "The Lord of Beaumont awaits you in the great hall. The feast is prepared." Eleanor closed her eyes, drawing a deep, steadying breath. Beaumont. Lord Robert Beaumont. Her betrothed. A man of solid reputation, of considerable lands, of unremarkable spirit. He was kind, he was courteous, he was everything a woman in her position should desire. He was not Tristan. "I shall be down presently, Agnes," she replied, her voice sounding strangely hollow even to her own ears. Agnes hesitated. "My lady, is everything well? You seem disturbed." "It is nothing, Agnes. Merely the melancholy of the season." A lie, of course. A necessary lie. The truth was a tangled knot of grief, resentment, and a fear that gnawed at her soul. Fear that she was betraying a love that, despite all evidence to the contrary, still flickered within her heart. Fear that she was condemning herself to a life devoid of passion, a life of quiet duty and emptiness. She turned from the window, forcing a semblance of composure onto her face. The face that stared back at her from the polished silver hand mirror Agnes held was that of a stranger. The youthful bloom had faded, replaced by a delicate, almost fragile beauty. Her eyes, once bright with youthful exuberance, now held a shadowed depth, a hint of the sorrow that had become her constant companion. Her lips, once quick to smile, were now set in a line of quiet resignation. Agnes carefully arranged the heavy braid of Eleanor's dark hair, weaving a silver ribbon through its thick strands. "You are beautiful, my lady," she said softly, her fingers lingering on Eleanor's shoulder. "Lord Beaumont is a fortunate man." Eleanor managed a faint smile. "Fortunate, perhaps. But will I be fortunate, Agnes? That is the question that haunts me." She did not expect an answer, and Agnes, wise in the ways of unspoken emotions, offered none. Instead, she draped a heavy velvet cloak, embroidered with the Ashbourne crest, a silver falcon soaring against a field of azure around Eleanor's shoulders. The weight of it felt both comforting and suffocating. As Eleanor descended the winding stone staircase, the sounds of the feast grew louder, the boisterous laughter of men-at-arms, the clatter of plates and goblets, the lilting melody of a lute. The great hall was ablaze with light, the massive stone fireplace roaring with a welcoming blaze. Tapestries depicting scenes of heroic battles and courtly love adorned the walls, their vibrant colors a stark contrast to the somber mood that clung to Eleanor like a shroud. Lord Beaumont rose from his seat at the high table as she approached, his face breaking into a broad smile. He was a man of imposing stature, with a thick beard and a booming voice. He was everything Tristan was not: solid, dependable, predictable. And yet, as he took her hand and pressed a dutiful kiss to her knuckles, Eleanor felt a pang of disappointment. There was no spark, no tremor of excitement, no recognition of souls. "My Lady Eleanor," he said, his voice full of genuine warmth. "You grace us with your presence. I trust you are well?" "Well enough, my lord," she replied, her voice betraying none of the turmoil within. The feast proceeded as all such feasts did, a parade of roasted meats, savory pies, and sweetmeats, accompanied by copious amounts of wine and ale. Eleanor picked at her food, her appetite dulled by the weight of her impending marriage. She watched as Lord Beaumont regaled his companions with tales of his recent hunting exploits, his laughter echoing through the hall. He was a good man, she reminded herself. A kind man. A man who would provide for her, protect her, give her children. A man who would never set her heart aflame. It was as she was toying with a piece of candied fruit that she saw him. He stood at the back of the hall, leaning against a stone pillar, his face half hidden in shadow. He was tall and lean, his body clad in the simple garb of a traveling knight. A long scar bisected his left eyebrow, a stark reminder of the battles he had fought. His eyes, dark and intense, met hers across the crowded room, and Eleanor felt a jolt of recognition that sent a shiver of both fear and longing through her very core. It was Tristan. He was alive. He had returned. For a moment, the world seemed to tilt on its axis. The sounds of the feast faded into a distant hum, the faces around her blurred into an indistinct mass. All she could see was him, his presence a tangible force in the room, a storm that threatened to shatter the carefully constructed walls of her composure. He moved then, pushing himself away from the pillar and walking towards her, his steps slow and deliberate. The crowd parted before him, as if sensing the unspoken tension that crackled in the air. He stopped before the high table, his gaze never leaving Eleanor's. Lord Beaumont, oblivious to the silent drama unfolding before him, rose to greet the newcomer. "Welcome, Sir Knight," he said, extending a hand in greeting. "You are a stranger to Ashbourne. What brings you to our hall?" Tristan ignored Beaumont's outstretched hand, his eyes fixed on Eleanor. His voice, when he spoke, was rough with something unspoken, a mixture of pain, accusation, and longing. "Did you mourn me, Eleanor?" he murmured, the question a low, guttural sound that cut through the noise of the hall. "Or did you pray I would never return?" The silence that followed was deafening. All eyes were on Eleanor, waiting, watching, judging. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. She could feel the blood draining from her face, leaving her pale and trembling. The carefully constructed facade of composure she had so painstakingly built shattered into 1,000 pieces, leaving her exposed and vulnerable. She was a trapped deer. One wrong move, one ill-spoken word, and ruin. Chapter 2. A vow renewed in stone. The question hung in the air, heavy and suffocating, like the smoke from the dying embers in the hearth. Eleanor felt the weight of every gaze upon her, the curious stares of the guests, the bewildered frown of Lord Beaumont, and the burning intensity of Tristan's eyes. Her throat constricted, her carefully rehearsed courtesies deserting her. She opened her mouth to speak, but no sound emerged. "Sir Knight," Lord Beaumont began again, his voice laced with a hint of impatience, "you have interrupted our feast. State your purpose, or my purpose." Tristan finally tore his gaze from Eleanor and turned to Beaumont, a flicker of something dangerous in his eyes. "My purpose is to reclaim what is rightfully mine." A murmur rippled through the hall. Beaumont stiffened, his hand instinctively moving to the hilt of his sword. "And what, pray tell, is that?" Tristan's gaze returned to Eleanor, unwavering. The Lady Eleanor of Ashbourne. My betrothed. The gasp that echoed through the hall was almost palpable. Eleanor felt a wave of dizziness wash over her, the room spinning momentarily. Betrothed? They had been once. A lifetime ago. Before the war, before the silence, before the despair had driven her to accept Beaumont's proposal. But there had never been a formal betrothal, no binding contract, only a whispered promise, a stolen kiss beneath the ancient oak tree in the castle courtyard. That is not entirely accurate. Eleanor found her voice, though it trembled with the effort. There was an understanding, yes, but no formal agreement. Nothing binding. Tristan's jaw tightened. An understanding? Is that what you call it now, Eleanor? A fleeting fancy? A childish game? His voice was low, but it carried a sharp edge of bitterness. I swore an oath to you, Eleanor. An oath witnessed by God and by the very stones of this castle. An oath I intended to keep. And I waited. Eleanor retorted, her voice gaining strength, fueled by a surge of anger and resentment. I waited for 5 years, Tristan. 5 years of silence. 5 years of wondering if you were alive or dead. 5 years of grieving. Grieving? Tristan's voice was laced with disbelief. You stand here, adorned in finery, betrothed to another, and you speak of grieving? I had to move on, Eleanor said, her voice cracking with emotion. I had to survive. Ashbourne needed a lord. I needed security. And did you find it, Eleanor? Tristan asked, his voice softening slightly. Did you find security in the arms of another? Did you find happiness? The question, so softly spoken, struck Eleanor like a physical blow. Happiness? No. She had found a measure of peace, perhaps. A sense of duty fulfilled. But happiness? That had died with the hope that Tristan would return. Lord Beaumont, his face flushed with anger, stepped forward. Enough, he boomed. This is unseemly. Sir Knight, you have overstepped your bounds. I will not have you disrupt my feast and insult my betrothed. Your betrothed? Tristan's eyes narrowed. She is mine, Beaumont. And I will not stand by and watch you take what is rightfully mine. The tension in the hall was thick enough to cut with a knife. The men at arms shifted uneasily, their hands resting on their weapons. A single spark could ignite a conflagration. Eleanor knew she had to act quickly. She stepped between the two men, her hands outstretched. Please, she said, her voice pleading. This is not the time or place for this. Tristan, you are welcome to stay at Ashbourne as our guest. We can discuss this matter further in the morning. Tristan looked at her, his eyes searching her face for any sign of deception. Discuss? He said softly. Is there anything left to discuss, Eleanor? Have you not already made your choice? I need time, Eleanor whispered. Time to understand. Time to think. Tristan hesitated, then nodded slowly. Very well, he said. I will grant you time, Eleanor. But know this, I will not relinquish my claim. I fought for you. I bled for you. And I will not surrender you without a fight. He turned and walked back towards the shadows, his movements stiff and controlled. The silence in the hall remained, broken only by the crackling of the fire and the heavy breathing of the assembled guests. Lord Beaumont turned to Eleanor, his expression a mixture of anger and confusion. What is the meaning of this, Eleanor? He demanded. Who is this man? And what is this talk of a betrothal? Eleanor closed her eyes, her head throbbing. How could she explain? How could she make him understand the tangled web of emotions that bound her to Tristan, a web woven from love, loss, and a loyalty that refused to die? He was a friend, she said, choosing her words carefully. A childhood friend. We were close once, but that was a long time ago, before the war. And this oath? Beaumont pressed. He spoke of an oath. Eleanor sighed. It was a childish promise. Nothing more. He took it more seriously than I did. Another lie. A necessary lie to protect herself, to protect Beaumont, to protect the fragile peace that she had so desperately sought. Beaumont studied her face, his eyes searching for any sign of deceit. He was not a fool. He knew there was more to the story than Eleanor was willing to reveal. But he also knew that he had to tread carefully. He had invested too much in this alliance, in this marriage, to let it be shattered by the sudden appearance of a ghost from the past. "Very well," he said finally, his voice tight with controlled anger. "I will accept your explanation, Eleanor.
For now.
But I expect a full accounting of this friendship in the morning. And I expect you to make it clear to this Sir Knight that you are betrothed to me, and that your loyalty lies with me." Eleanor nodded, her heart heavy with a sense of foreboding. She had bought herself some time, but she knew that the storm was far from over. Tristan had returned, and he had thrown down a gauntlet. She had a choice to make, a choice that would determine not only her own future, but the future of Ashbourne and the fate of two men who claimed to love her. The stones whispered around her, old secrets, old vows. She had to pick, to build or break anew. The night was dark, and dawn seemed a distant, impossible dream. Chapter 3. Whispers in the Tapestries. Sleep eluded Eleanor. The grand feather bed, usually a haven of comfort, felt like a bed of thorns. Every creak of the ancient castle, every rustle of the wind through the arrow slits, sounded like Tristan's voice, whispering her name, accusing, pleading, loving. She tossed and turned, the heavy velvet curtains of the bed doing little to shut out the turmoil within her mind. The scene in the great hall replayed itself endlessly, each word, each glance, each unspoken emotion magnified by the silence of the night. She saw the shock on Beaumont's face, the barely contained fury in Tristan's eyes, and her own desperate attempts to maintain a semblance of control. She had lied. She had lied to Beaumont, she had lied to Tristan, and she had lied to herself. The childish promise she had so easily dismissed had been anything but. It had been a vow, a sacred pledge made in the blush of first love, a promise sealed with a kiss beneath the watchful gaze of the ancient oak. She had believed in that promise, had clung to it through the long years of waiting. But time, and the relentless pressure of her duty to Ashbourne, had eroded her faith, leaving her vulnerable to Beaumont's steady, if uninspiring, courtship. She rose from the bed, wrapping a thick shawl around her shoulders. The stone floor was cold beneath her bare feet as she paced the length of the chamber. The moon, a sliver of silver in the inky sky, cast long, dancing shadows on the walls, transforming familiar objects into strange, unsettling shapes. She stopped before a large tapestry that depicted the founding of Ashbourne, a scene of knights in shining armor, valiant deeds, and a beautiful maiden rescued from a fearsome dragon. It was a romanticized version of history, of course, but it served as a constant reminder of her lineage, of the responsibilities she had inherited. As she gazed at the tapestry, she noticed something she had never seen before. A small, almost imperceptible detail hidden in the intricate weave of the dragon's scales. A tiny, embroidered falcon, identical to the Ashbourne crest, but with one crucial difference: it was clutching a single, blood-red rose in its talons. The rose. Tristan's family crest. The de Warwick rose. A wave of dizziness washed over her. She reached out, her fingers tracing the outline of the hidden emblem. How had she never noticed it before? Had it always been there? Or had it appeared? A whisper of sound behind her made her turn. Tristan stood in the doorway, his silhouette framed by the faint light of the moon. He was dressed in a simple tunic and breeches, his sword belt discarded, his face etched with a weariness that mirrored her own. "I could not sleep," he said, his voice low and husky. "And I saw the light beneath your door." Eleanor clutched the shawl tighter around her, suddenly acutely aware of her disheveled state. I was just admiring the tapestry," she said, her voice trembling slightly. He moved closer, his gaze drawn to the tapestry. He followed her outstretched hand, his eyes lingering on the hidden rose. "My mother embroidered that," he said softly. "She was a skilled needlewoman. And a romantic." I never noticed the rose before," Eleanor said.
Tristan smiled, a sad, wistful smile.
It was her secret, a symbol of our connection. She always believed we were destined to be together. Eleanor felt a pang of guilt. His mother. She had liked Tristan's mother, a kind, gentle woman who had welcomed her into their home with open arms. She had died during the war, another casualty of the conflict that had torn their lives apart. "I am sorry for your loss," Eleanor said softly. "She was a good woman." Tristan nodded, his eyes clouded with grief. "She would have wanted me to fight for you, Eleanor," he said, his voice regaining its intensity. "She would have wanted me to honor our vow. But things have changed, Tristan," Eleanor said, her voice pleading. "I am betrothed to another. I have responsibilities, obligations. Obligations to a man you do not love." Tristan challenged, his eyes searching her face. Eleanor averted her gaze. "Love is not always enough," she said quietly. "There are other considerations. Duty, security, the well-being of my people." "And what of your own well-being, Eleanor?" Tristan asked, his voice softening. "What of your own happiness? Do you believe you will find it in a loveless marriage?" He stepped closer, his hand reaching out to gently cup her cheek. His touch, so familiar, yet so forbidden, sent a shiver of longing through her. She closed her eyes, leaning into his touch, savoring the warmth of his hand against her skin. "I don't know," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "I don't know what I want anymore." "I know what you want," Tristan said, his voice a low murmur against her ear. "You want what we had, Eleanor. What we could have again. If only you would let yourself remember." He leaned in, his lips brushing against hers, a tentative, questioning touch. Eleanor's heart pounded in her chest, her senses reeling. She knew she should push him away, should resist, should uphold her duty to Beaumont. But the years of longing, the memory of his kiss, the undeniable pull of their shared past, overwhelmed her reason. She met his kiss, her lips parting beneath his, a silent surrender to the emotions that she had so long suppressed. It was a kiss of remembrance, of regret, of a love that refused to die. It was a kiss that shattered the fragile walls of her resolve, leaving her vulnerable and exposed. As they broke apart, breathless and trembling, the reality of their situation crashed down upon them. They were standing in the shadows of her chamber, on the eve of her wedding to another man, their love a forbidden flame that threatened to consume them both. The tapestry behind them seemed to whisper secrets, warnings, and promises all at once. The falcon and the rose, intertwined, a symbol of a love that was both beautiful and dangerous. Eleanor knew that she had reached a crossroads. She could no longer hide from the truth, from the choice that lay before her. A choice between duty and desire, between security and passion, between a life of quiet resignation and a love that could either save her or destroy her. Chapter 4. The Falcon's Flight. The dawn crept in, gray and hesitant, mirroring the turmoil in Eleanor's heart. The kiss, still vivid in her memory, had stirred a tempest within her, a battle between the woman she had become and the girl she once was. Sleep had been impossible, replaced by a restless pacing of her chamber, the cold stone a poor comfort to her burning skin. She dressed quickly, choosing a simple gown of dark green, its plainness a stark contrast to the elaborate attire she had worn the previous evening. She needed clarity, not adornment. She needed to think, to plan, to find a way through the impossible maze that fate had laid before her. As she left her chamber, she encountered Agnes, her handmaiden's eyes wide with concern. "My lady, you look pale.
Did you not sleep?"
Eleanor managed a weak smile. "I slept little, Agnes. There is much on my mind." "Lord Beaumont awaits you in the solar," Agnes said, her voice hesitant. He seemed displeased. Eleanor sighed. Displeased was an understatement. She had left him humiliated and angry in the great hall, and she knew that she owed him an explanation, an apology, perhaps even a retraction of her wavering stance. She found him standing by the window, gazing out at the courtyard. He turned as she entered, his expression stern and unyielding. "Eleanor," he said, his voice devoid of its usual warmth. "We have much to discuss." "I know, my lord," Eleanor replied, keeping her voice steady. "And I apologize for my behavior last night. It was unseemly." "Unseemly?" Beaumont raised an eyebrow. "It was a disgrace." You allowed a stranger, a renegade knight, to disrupt our betrothal feast and insult me in front of my own people. He is not a stranger, Robert, Eleanor said quietly. He is Sir Tristan de Warwick. We were close, once. Close? Beaumont scoffed. He claims you were betrothed. He claims you as his own. It was a childhood understanding, Eleanor explained, choosing her words carefully. A promise made before everything changed. And, do you still consider yourself bound by this childhood understanding? Beaumont asked, his eyes piercing. Eleanor hesitated. This was the crux of the matter, the question she had been avoiding all night. Could she, in good conscience, deny the vow she had made to Tristan, a vow that, despite the passage of time, still held a powerful grip on her heart? I do not know, she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. Beaumont's face hardened. You do not know? Eleanor, you are to be my wife. You cannot be uncertain about such a fundamental matter. I need time, Robert, Eleanor pleaded. Time to sort through my feelings. Time to understand what is best for Ashbourne, for myself. Time? Beaumont laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. Time is a luxury we do not have. The alliance between our houses is crucial, Eleanor. It is a matter of political necessity. Personal feelings cannot be allowed to interfere. Eleanor flinched at his words. Political necessity. That was all she was to him, a pawn in a game of power and influence. A means to an end. And what of Tristan? She asked, her voice trembling slightly. What am I to do about him? Beaumont's expression darkened. He is a threat, he said bluntly. A threat to our alliance, to our security. He must be dealt with. Dealt with? Eleanor's eyes widened in alarm. What do you mean? I mean, he must be persuaded to leave Ashbourne, Beaumont said, his voice cold and calculating. And if persuasion fails, other methods may be necessary. Eleanor felt a chill run down her spine. She knew Beaumont was a ruthless man, a man capable of doing whatever it took to achieve his goals. But she had never imagined he would resort to violence. No, she said, her voice firm. I will not allow it. Tristan is a good man. He has done nothing wrong. He has challenged my claim to you, Beaumont retorted. That is wrong enough. He stepped closer, his hand reaching out to grasp her arm. His grip was tight, almost painful. You will tell him, Eleanor, he said, his voice low and menacing. You will tell him that you are mine, that you have chosen me, and you will tell him to leave Ashbourne and never return. Eleanor looked into his eyes, and for the first time, she saw the true extent of his ambition, his ruthlessness. She saw a man who would not hesitate to crush anyone who stood in his way. And she knew that she would not be a part of his plans. She pulled her arm free from his grasp, her eyes flashing with defiance. I will speak to Tristan, she said, her voice strong and clear. But I will not be your puppet, Robert. I will make my own decision, based on what I believe is right, not what you dictate. She turned and walked towards the door, her head held high. She had to find Tristan, to warn him, to tell him what? She still didn't know. But she knew that she could no longer hide from the truth, from the choice that lay before her. As she walked through the castle corridors, she saw a falcon perched on a window ledge, its keen eyes fixed on the distant horizon. It was a magnificent creature, its feathers the color of silver and smoke, its talons sharp and powerful. It was the Ashbourne falcon, the symbol of her family, of her heritage. And in that moment, Eleanor knew what she had to do. She had to be like the falcon, strong, independent, free. She had to soar above the petty squabbles and political machinations and follow her own heart, her own destiny. She had to choose her own path, even if it meant defying the expectations of her family, her society, and the man she was supposed to marry. The falcon took flight, soaring into the vast expanse of the sky, and Eleanor felt a surge of hope, a renewed sense of purpose. She would not be caged. She would fly. Chapter 5. Beneath a starlit sky. Eleanor found Tristan in the stables, tending to his warhorse, a magnificent black stallion named Shadow. The scent of hay and leather filled the air, a comforting, earthy aroma that calmed her frayed nerves. He looked up as she approached, his eyes searching her face, questioning. "Eleanor," he said softly, his voice devoid of the anger and accusation of the previous night. "Have you spoken with Beaumont?" She nodded, her throat tight with emotion.
"I have. And?"
She hesitated, choosing her words carefully. He is not pleased." Tristan smiled wryly. "I did not expect him to be." He wants you to leave," Eleanor said, her voice barely a whisper. Tristan's smile faded. "I will not leave without you, Eleanor." He spoke of other methods. Eleanor continued, her voice trembling. "If persuasion fails." Tristan's eyes darkened. "He threatens me?" "He threatens us both, Tristan," Eleanor said, her voice rising in urgency. "He is a powerful man, a ruthless man. He will not hesitate to do whatever it takes to secure our alliance." "Let him try," Tristan said, his voice low and dangerous. "I have faced worse than Beaumont on the battlefield." "This is not a battlefield," Tristan, Eleanor pleaded. "This is a game of politics, of intrigue. And Beaumont is a master of that game." Tristan stepped closer, his hand reaching out to gently cup her cheek. His touch, as always, sent a shiver of longing through her. "And what do you want, Eleanor?" he asked, his voice soft and tender. "What does your heart tell you?" Eleanor closed her eyes, leaning into his touch, savoring the warmth of his hand against her skin. Her heart. It was a chaotic mess of conflicting emotions, of love and fear, of duty and desire. But beneath the turmoil, a single, clear voice was emerging, a voice that spoke of a love that had endured the test of time, a love that deserved a chance. I want to be with you, Tristan," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "But I am afraid." "Afraid of what?" Tristan asked, his thumb gently stroking her cheek. "Afraid of the consequences," Eleanor said. "Afraid of what Beaumont might do. Afraid of disappointing everyone." "Do not be afraid, Eleanor," Tristan said, his voice firm and reassuring. "I will protect you. I will protect us both. We will face this together." He drew her closer, his arms wrapping around her, holding her tight. She buried her face in his chest, breathing in the familiar scent of leather and steel, finding comfort in his strength, in his unwavering love. "We need a plan," she said, her voice muffled against his tunic. "I have a plan," Tristan said. "But it will require trust, Eleanor. Complete trust." She lifted her head, her eyes searching his face. "I trust you, Tristan," she said, her voice firm. "With my life." He smiled, a genuine smile that reached his eyes, chasing away the shadows that had haunted them. "Then meet me tonight," he said, "beneath the old oak tree. At midnight. We will leave Ashbourne together. We will start a new life, far from here, far from Beaumont's reach." The old oak tree, their special place. The place where they had first declared their love, where they had made their vows. A place of memories, of promises, of hope. "I will be there," Eleanor said, her voice filled with a newfound determination. He kissed her then, a long, passionate kiss that sealed their pact, their promise to defy the odds, to fight for their love. It was a kiss that banished her fears, replacing them with a sense of hope, of excitement, of a future that, for the first time in a long time, felt bright and full of promise. As the day wore on, Eleanor moved through her duties with a sense of purpose, a secret joy that bubbled beneath the surface of her carefully constructed composure. She endured Beaumont's cold silences and veiled threats, knowing that she would soon be free of him, free of the suffocating constraints of her duty. As darkness fell, she excused herself from the evening meal, claiming a headache. Agnes, ever perceptive, saw through her ruse, but offered only a knowing smile and a silent blessing. Eleanor donned a dark cloak, its hood concealing her face. She slipped out of the castle unnoticed, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and excitement. The moon, a silver crescent in the inky sky, illuminated her path as she made her way to the old oak tree. The tree stood on a small rise overlooking the castle, its massive branches reaching up to the heavens like the arms of a benevolent god. It was a place of ancient power, a place of whispered secrets and forgotten vows. Tristan was already there, waiting for her, his silhouette outlined against the starlit sky. He turned as she approached, his face breaking into a smile of relief and love. "You came," he said, his voice soft and tender. "I promised," Eleanor replied, her voice filled with emotion. He took her hand, his fingers intertwining with hers, a silent symbol of their unbreakable bond. They stood there for a moment, beneath the watchful gaze of the stars, their love a beacon of hope in the darkness. The future was uncertain, fraught with danger, but they were together, and that was all that mattered. They were ready to face whatever lay ahead, their love a shield against the storms to come. Chapter 6. The Serpent's Kiss. The escape was fraught with peril. Every rustle of leaves, every hoot of an owl, sent shivers of apprehension down Eleanor's spine. Tristan, ever vigilant, guided her through the darkened forest, his hand firmly clasped in hers, his senses alert to any sign of danger. They had chosen a circuitous route, avoiding the main roads and sticking to the overgrown paths known only to hunters and poachers. Shadow, Tristan's warhorse, followed silently behind, his hooves muffled by the thick carpet of fallen leaves. "We must reach the coast," Tristan explained, his voice low and urgent. "There is a ship waiting for us, a vessel bound for the free cities. We will be safe there, beyond Beaumont's reach." Eleanor nodded, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and exhilaration. The free cities. A haven for outlaws, exiles, and those seeking a new life, a place where they could forge their own destiny, free from the constraints of feudal obligations. As they neared the edge of the forest, a sudden sound made them freeze. The unmistakable clang of steel, followed by a muffled cry. Tristan pushed Eleanor behind a thick oak tree, drawing his sword, his body tense and alert. "Stay here," he whispered, "and do not make a sound." He moved silently into the darkness, his sword held high, his senses straining to identify the source of the disturbance. Eleanor waited, her heart hammering against her ribs, her breath caught in her throat. The silence stretched on, broken only by the rustling of the wind through the trees. Then, a sudden shout, followed by the sounds of a struggle. Eleanor could not bear the suspense any longer. She crept out from behind the tree, her eyes peering into the darkness, trying to make sense of the chaos unfolding before her. She saw Tristan engaged in a fierce sword fight with two men, their faces obscured by shadows. They were clearly skilled swordsmen, their movements swift and deadly. Tristan fought with the courage and ferocity of a cornered lion, his blade a blur of silver in the moonlight. But he was outnumbered. One of the men managed to land a blow, his sword slicing through Tristan's tunic, drawing blood. Tristan staggered, but he did not fall. He roared in defiance, his eyes blazing with fury, and renewed his attack. Eleanor knew she had to do something. She could not stand by and watch Tristan be killed. She scanned the area, her eyes searching for a weapon, anything she could use to help him. She spotted a fallen branch, thick and heavy, lying near the base of the tree. She picked it up, her hands trembling, and crept closer to the fray. She waited for her opportunity, her heart pounding in her chest. As one of the men lunged at Tristan, his back exposed, Eleanor struck. She swung the branch with all her might, hitting the man squarely on the back of the head. He crumpled to the ground, unconscious. Tristan, seizing the advantage, quickly dispatched the remaining attacker. He turned to Eleanor, his face streaked with blood and sweat, his eyes filled with a mixture of gratitude and admiration. "You saved me," he said, his voice hoarse. "We saved each other," Eleanor replied, her voice trembling. They embraced, their bodies clinging together, their hearts beating as one. The danger had passed, but the reality of their situation was stark. They were fugitives, hunted by a powerful enemy, their future uncertain. As they continued their journey, a new sound reached their ears. The distant baying of hounds. Beaumont had unleashed his hunting dogs. "We must hurry," Tristan said, his voice urgent. "They are close." They mounted Shadow, Eleanor riding pillion behind Tristan, her arms wrapped tightly around his waist. The horse galloped through the forest, its powerful strides eating up the ground. But the hounds were gaining on them. Their baying grew louder, closer, more menacing. Eleanor could feel the fear rising within her, a cold knot of dread in the pit of her stomach. They reached a river, its waters dark and swift-flowing. Tristan urged Shadow into the water, the horse swimming strongly against the current. As they reached the far bank, they saw them. A group of horsemen, led by Beaumont himself, emerging from the forest. Beaumont's face was a mask of fury, his eyes blazing with hatred. "There they are," he shouted. "After them." The horsemen spurred their mounts, plunging into the river after Tristan and Eleanor. Tristan urged Shadow to greater speed, the horse galloping along the riverbank. But Beaumont's men were closing in. Suddenly, an arrow whizzed past Eleanor's head, narrowly missing her. Another followed, and another. Beaumont's men were shooting at them. Tristan drew his sword, deflecting the arrows as best he could. But one arrow found its mark, piercing Shadow's flank. The horse stumbled, throwing Tristan and Eleanor to the ground. Eleanor landed hard, her head hitting a rock. Darkness closed in. When she regained consciousness, she was surrounded by Beaumont's men. Tristan was lying beside her, unconscious, his face pale and bloodied. Beaumont stood over them, his face a mask of triumph. "So," he said, his voice cold and cruel, "the falcon has been caught, and the night has fallen." He leaned down, his hand reaching out to touch Eleanor's cheek. His touch was not gentle, not loving, but possessive, cruel. It felt like the kiss of a serpent, cold and deadly. "You belong to me now, Eleanor," he said, "and you will learn to obey." Chapter 7. Shadows of the Past. The journey back to Ashbourne was a blur of pain and despair. Eleanor, bound and bruised, was forced to ride alongside Beaumont, his cold gaze a constant reminder of her captivity. Tristan, unconscious and bleeding, was slung over his own horse like a sack of grain, his fate uncertain. The castle, once a symbol of home and security, now loomed before her like a prison. Its stone walls, once welcoming, now seemed cold and forbidding. The faces of the servants, once familiar and friendly, were now averted, their eyes filled with pity and fear. Eleanor was taken to her chamber, the same room where she had shared a stolen kiss with Tristan just hours before. The memory of that kiss, of his touch, of his promise of a new life, now felt like a cruel mockery. Agnes, her handmaiden, rushed to her side, her face etched with worry. "My lady, what has happened? You are injured." Eleanor managed a weak smile. "I am alive, Agnes. That is all that matters." Agnes helped her undress, her fingers gentle as she cleaned and bandaged Eleanor's wounds. She said little, but her eyes spoke volumes. She knew, as everyone in the castle must know, that Eleanor had tried to escape, that she had chosen Tristan over Beaumont, and that she had failed. As Agnes tended to her, Eleanor's gaze fell upon the tapestry, the one depicting the founding of Ashbourne, the one with the hidden rose, Tristan's family crest. She remembered his words, his mother's belief in their destined love. It all seemed so foolish now, so naive. "Agnes," she said, her voice barely a whisper, "do you believe in destiny?" Agnes hesitated, her eyes searching Eleanor's face. "I believe we make our own choices, my lady," she said softly. "But sometimes fate has a way of intervening. And do you believe I made the wrong choice?" Eleanor asked, her voice trembling. Agnes met her gaze, her expression unwavering. "I believe you followed your heart, my lady," she said. "And that is never wrong." Her words offered a small measure of comfort, a flicker of hope in the darkness that had enveloped Eleanor. But the reality of her situation was inescapable. She was a prisoner in her own home, at the mercy of a man who despised her, her future bleak and uncertain. Later that evening, Beaumont summoned her to the great hall. He was seated at the high table, his face still a mask of cold fury. Tristan was nowhere to be seen. "You have disgraced me, Eleanor," he said, his voice devoid of any emotion. "You have betrayed my trust, and you have insulted my honor. I did what I believed was right, Eleanor replied, her voice steady, despite the fear that churned within her. Right? Beaumont scoffed. You chose a landless knight, a fugitive, over me? Over the security and prosperity of your own people? I chose love, Eleanor said, her voice rising in defiance. Something you know nothing about. Beaumont's eyes narrowed. Love is a weakness, Eleanor, he said. A foolish sentiment that blinds you to the realities of the world. You will learn that in time. And what of Tristan? Eleanor asked, her voice trembling with apprehension. What have you done with him? Beaumont smiled, a cruel, chilling smile. He is being held, he said. For now. His fate depends on you, Eleanor. What do you mean? Eleanor asked, her heart pounding in her chest. You will marry me, Eleanor, Beaumont said, his voice firm and unwavering. You will swear an oath of loyalty to me, and you will renounce your attachment to this Sir Knight. And if you do, he will be allowed to live. He will be banished from Ashbourne, of course, but he will live. Eleanor felt a wave of nausea wash over her. He was using Tristan as a pawn, a bargaining chip to force her into submission. He was offering her a choice, a cruel, impossible choice, Tristan's life or her own freedom. And if I refuse? Eleanor asked, her voice barely a whisper. Beaumont's smile widened. Then he dies, he said simply. And you will bear the responsibility for his death. The silence in the hall was deafening. Eleanor's mind raced, desperately seeking a way out, a solution that would save both Tristan and herself. But there was none. She was trapped, cornered, her back against the wall. She looked at Beaumont, his face cold and impassive, and she knew that he was not bluffing. He was a man of his word, a man capable of unspeakable cruelty. He would not hesitate to kill Tristan if she refused to comply. She had a choice of a terrible sort, one that could save but not fully, one that could free but chain at the same time. She closed her eyes, her heart aching with a pain that was almost unbearable. She thought of Tristan, of his smile, of his touch, of his unwavering love. She thought of the life they could have had, the life that had been so cruelly snatched away from them. She was cornered, in the deepest dark. A sacrifice of a different kind. I will marry you, she whispered, her voice choked with tears. I swear it. The shadows of her past seemed to embrace her, a chilling reminder that some loves were doomed, some choices impossible, and some freedoms bought at a price too high to bear. Chapter 8. A Dance of Deception. The wedding was a somber affair, a stark contrast to the joyous celebrations that should have accompanied such an event. The great hall, once filled with laughter and music, was now shrouded in a heavy silence, the atmosphere thick with unspoken tension. Eleanor, dressed in a gown of white silk, a symbol of purity and innocence that felt like a cruel mockery, stood beside Beaumont at the altar, her heart a leaden weight in her chest. She repeated the vows, her voice hollow and lifeless, her gaze fixed on the stone floor, avoiding the pitying glances of the assembled guests. Tristan was not present. Beaumont had kept his word, allowing him to live, but banishing him from Ashbourne, his fate unknown. Eleanor had not seen him since that fateful night in the forest, and the pain of his absence was a constant ache in her heart. As Beaumont placed the wedding ring on her finger, a heavy gold band that felt more like a shackle, Eleanor fought back the tears that threatened to spill. She was trapped, bound to a man she did not love, her dreams of a life with Tristan shattered forever. The feast that followed was a strained affair. Eleanor picked at her food, her appetite gone, her mind consumed by thoughts of Tristan, wondering where he was, if he was safe, if he still thought of her. Beaumont, for his part, made a show of affection, placing a possessive hand on her arm, smiling for the benefit of the guests. But his eyes were cold, his touch devoid of any warmth. He knew that he had won, that he had broken her spirit, that he had forced her into submission. But beneath the surface of her despair, a spark of defiance still flickered within Eleanor. She had agreed to marry Beaumont, to save Tristan's life, but she had not surrendered her will, her spirit. She would play the role of the dutiful wife, but she would never truly be his. She would find a way, somehow, to resist him, to maintain her own identity, to keep the memory of Tristan alive in her heart. As the days turned into weeks, Eleanor settled into a routine of quiet resistance. She performed her duties as Lady of Ashbourne, managing the household, overseeing the estates, attending to the needs of her people. She was courteous to Beaumont, obedient to his commands, but she never offered him any genuine affection, never allowed him to see the pain and resentment that simmered beneath her calm exterior. She spent hours in the castle library, poring over ancient texts, seeking knowledge, seeking solace, seeking a way to she didn't even know what. Escape? Revenge? Justice? She wasn't sure. But she knew that she could not simply accept her fate, that she had to fight, somehow, to reclaim her life. She also spent time in the castle chapel, praying for Tristan's safety, praying for strength, praying for a miracle. The chapel, with its stained glass windows and flickering candles, was a sanctuary, a place where she could find a measure of peace, a place where she could commune with her own soul. One evening, as she was walking through the castle gardens, she noticed a familiar figure standing by the old oak tree, the place where she and Tristan had made their vows, the place where they had planned their escape. It was Agnes, her handmaiden, her face etched with a mixture of sadness and determination. "Agnes," Eleanor said softly, "what are you doing here?" Agnes turned, her eyes meeting Eleanor's. "I needed to speak with you, my lady," she said, her voice hesitant. "In private." Eleanor led her to a secluded bench, hidden amongst the rose bushes. "What is it, Agnes?" she asked, her heart filled with a sudden sense of foreboding. Agnes took a deep breath, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "I have news of Sir Tristan," she said, her voice low and urgent. Eleanor's heart leaped with a mixture of hope and fear. "What news? Is he alive?" "He is alive, my lady," Agnes confirmed. "And he has not forgotten you." Agnes then revealed a secret, a dangerous secret that she had kept hidden for weeks. She had been in contact with Tristan, acting as a go-between, carrying messages back and forth between him and a network of loyal supporters within Ashbourne. Tristan was not far away. He was hiding in the surrounding forests, gathering allies, planning his return. He had not given up on Eleanor, and he was determined to rescue her from Beaumont's clutches. Eleanor felt a surge of hope, a renewed sense of purpose. Tristan was alive, and he was fighting for her. She was not alone. "We must be careful, Agnes," Eleanor said, her voice firm. "Beaumont is suspicious. He watches me constantly." "I know, my lady," Agnes replied. "But we have a plan. A dangerous plan, but it is our only hope." The plan, as Agnes outlined it, was audacious, risky, almost suicidal. But it was also their only chance to escape Beaumont's tyranny, to reclaim their lives, to be together again. Eleanor listened, her mind racing, weighing the risks, calculating the odds. It was a dance of deception, a game of shadows, where one wrong move could mean disaster. But she was not afraid. She had nothing left to lose, except her love for Tristan, and that was something she would never surrender. She had made her choice. She would fight. She would dance with deception and pray that, in the end, love would triumph over tyranny. Chapter 9. The Price of Honor. The plan was set in motion with a subtle precision that belied the danger it entailed. Agnes, with her unassuming demeanor and access to all corners of the castle, became Eleanor's eyes and ears, relaying messages, gathering information, and sowing seeds of dissent among the castle staff. Eleanor, for her part, played the role of the submissive wife with an Oscar-worthy performance. She masked her defiance behind a facade of quiet obedience, enduring Beaumont's coldness and his veiled threats, all the while plotting his downfall. The key to the plan was to exploit Beaumont's arrogance and his overconfidence. He believed he had broken Eleanor's spirit, that she was completely under his control. He had underestimated her resilience, her intelligence, and her unwavering love for Tristan. The opportunity they had been waiting for arrived with the announcement of a grand tournament to be held at Ashbourne. Knights from across the region would gather to compete for honor and glory, and Beaumont, ever eager to display his power and wealth, saw it as a chance to further solidify his position. The tournament would also provide a cover for Tristan's return. He would enter the lists disguised as a nameless knight, his identity hidden beneath a suit of borrowed armor. He would challenge Beaumont, and in the ensuing chaos, Eleanor would escape. It was a risky gambit dependent on timing, skill, and a healthy dose of luck. But it was their best and perhaps only chance. As the day of the tournament approached, Eleanor's anxiety grew. She moved through her duties with a forced calm, her mind constantly replaying the details of the plan, anticipating every possible obstacle, every potential point of failure. She met with Agnes in secret, exchanging whispered words of encouragement and reassurance. They had become more than mistress and servant, they were conspirators, sisters in arms, bound together by a shared purpose. On the morning of the tournament, Eleanor dressed in a gown of deep blue, the color of the Ashbourne falcon, a subtle symbol of her defiance. She stood beside Beaumont on the raised dais, watching as the knights paraded before them, their armor gleaming in the sunlight, their banners fluttering in the breeze. She searched the ranks, her heart pounding in her chest, seeking a glimpse of Tristan, of the man she loved, the man who had risked everything to come back for her. And then she saw him. He was riding a magnificent black stallion, his face hidden behind a closed visor, his armor plain and unadorned, except for a single detail, a small, embroidered rose on his surcoat, a secret signal, a message of love and hope. Her heart soared. He was here. He had come. The tournament began with a series of justs, each knight challenging another. The air filled with the thunder of hooves, the splintering of lances, and the cheers of the crowd. Beaumont, a skilled warrior himself, entered the lists early, unseating several opponents with ease, his arrogance growing with each victory. As the day wore on, Tristan, under the guise of the Knight of the Rose, steadily advanced through the ranks, his skill and determination evident in every bout. He defeated opponent after opponent, his identity remaining a mystery, the crowd buzzing with speculation about the unknown knight who dared to challenge the established order. Finally, the moment arrived. Tristan, the Knight of the Rose, challenged Beaumont, the Lord of Ashbourne. A hush fell over the crowd. This was the match everyone had been waiting for, the clash between the established power and the unknown challenger, the battle between good and evil, between love and tyranny. Beaumont accepted the challenge with a sneer, confident of victory. He believed he was invincible, that no one could defeat him, especially not a nameless knight with no lands, no title, no reputation. The two knights faced each other at opposite ends of the lists, their lances lowered, their horses pawing the ground, eager for the charge. The signal was given, and they spurred their mounts forward, the thunder of their hooves echoing through the silent arena. The impact was deafening, the two lances splintering on impact. But neither knight was unseated. They circled, drew new lances, and charged again. This time, Tristan's aim was true. His lance struck Beaumont squarely in the chest, lifting him from his saddle and sending him crashing to the ground. The crowd erupted in a mixture of cheers and gasps. Beaumont, stunned and humiliated, lay on the ground, his armor dented, his pride shattered. This was the moment. Eleanor rose from her seat, her eyes fixed on Tristan. He removed his helmet, revealing his face to the astonished crowd. "I am Tristan de Warwick," he declared, his voice ringing out across the arena. "And I have come to reclaim what is rightfully mine." Chaos erupted. Beaumont's men drew their swords, ready to defend their lord. But Tristan's supporters, who had infiltrated the crowd, also drew their weapons, ready to fight for their cause. Eleanor, seizing the opportunity, slipped away from the dais, unnoticed in the confusion. Agnes was waiting for her, her hand outstretched. "Come, my lady," she said urgently. "We must go." They fled the arena, making their way through the back passages of the castle, heading for the stables, where horses were waiting. But as they reached the stables, they were confronted by Beaumont, his face contorted with rage, his sword drawn. He had recovered from his fall, and he was determined to prevent Eleanor's escape. "It has ended like this," then he spat at her, blocking the way. Honor was a joke to him. He wanted blood. "You will not escape me, Eleanor," he said, his voice cold and menacing. "You belong to me." He lunged at her, his sword aimed at her heart. The price of honor, it seemed, was to be paid in blood. Chapter 10. Scars of the Heart. Eleanor closed her eyes, bracing for the inevitable. She had known this moment might come, that Beaumont would not let her go without a fight. But she had hoped, prayed, that it would not end this way, with violence, with bloodshed. But before Beaumont's sword could reach her, a figure stepped in front of her, blocking the blow. It was Tristan. He had somehow managed to escape the chaos in the arena and had followed them to the stables. His own sword met Beaumont's, the clang of steel echoing through the stable yard. They fought with a ferocity born of years of pent-up anger and resentment, their blades a blur of silver in the fading light. Eleanor watched, her heart pounding in her chest, her breath caught in her throat. She wanted to help, to intervene, but she knew she would only be a hindrance. This was a battle Tristan had to fight, a battle for his honor, for his love, for his future. Agnes, ever practical, pulled Eleanor towards the horses. "We must go, my lady," she urged, "while we still have a chance." Eleanor hesitated, her gaze fixed on Tristan, her heart torn between her desire to stay and her need to escape. But she knew Agnes was right. They had to leave, to give Tristan a chance to win, to give themselves a chance to survive. She allowed Agnes to help her mount a horse, her eyes still locked on Tristan. He was holding his own against Beaumont, his skill and determination evident in every move. But Beaumont was a formidable opponent, strong and ruthless, fueled by a rage that bordered on madness. As they rode away from the stables, Eleanor heard a cry, a sound of pain and anguish. She turned, her heart sinking, and saw Tristan stumble, his hand clutching his side, blood staining his tunic. Beaumont stood over him, his sword raised, ready to deliver the final blow. "No!" Eleanor screamed, her voice echoing through the courtyard. But it was too late. Beaumont's sword came down, striking Tristan with a sickening thud. Eleanor felt a pain, sharp and intense, as if the sword had pierced her own heart. She wanted to go back, to help him, to hold him, but Agnes urged her horse forward, pulling her away from the scene of horror. They rode through the night, the darkness mirroring the despair in Eleanor's heart. She had lost him. She had lost Tristan again. This time she knew it was for good. The escape plan had failed. Tristan was dead, Beaumont was victorious, and she was once again a prisoner, her fate more uncertain than ever. They reached a small, secluded cottage, a safe house arranged by Tristan's supporters. Agnes helped Eleanor dismount, her hands trembling, her face etched with grief. I am so sorry, my lady," she said, her voice choked with tears. I did not know this would happen." Eleanor said nothing. She was numb, her mind unable to process the enormity of her loss. She had lost everything. Her love, her hope, her future. Agnes led her inside the cottage, a simple, sparsely furnished dwelling that offered little comfort. She helped Eleanor remove her blood-stained gown, replacing it with a plain woolen dress. She cleaned and bandaged the cuts and bruises Eleanor had sustained during the escape, her touch gentle and caring. But nothing could ease the pain in Eleanor's heart, the gaping wound that Tristan's death had left behind. She sat by the fire, staring into the flames, her mind replaying the events of the day, the tournament, the fight, Tristan's fall. She remembered his smile, his touch, his unwavering love. She remembered his promise to protect her, to fight for her, to build a new life with her. And she remembered his sacrifice. He had given his life for her, to save her from Beaumont, to give her a chance at freedom. A single tear rolled down Eleanor's cheek, followed by another, and another, until she was weeping uncontrollably, her body shaking with the force of her grief. Agnes held her, rocking her gently, offering words of comfort, but Eleanor could not be consoled. Her world had shattered, her heart broken beyond repair. As the night wore on, Eleanor's grief slowly gave way to a cold, hard determination. Tristan was gone, but his memory would live on. She would not let his sacrifice be in vain. She would find a way to avenge his death, to bring Beaumont to justice, to reclaim her own life. She had lost her love, but she had not lost her spirit. She would fight. She would survive. She would honor Tristan's memory by living a life worthy of his sacrifice. The scars of her heart would remain, a constant reminder of her loss, but they would also be a source of strength, a reminder of the love that had endured, even in the face of death. Chapter 11. The Unveiling. The days that followed were a blur of grief and quiet planning. Eleanor, cloaked in the guise of a simple peasant woman, remained hidden in the secluded cottage, tended to by Agnes and a small group of Tristan's loyal supporters. They treated her with a deference that belied her humble surroundings, their loyalty to Tristan extending to the woman he had loved. She spent her days tending to the small garden, finding a measure of solace in the simple act of nurturing life, a stark contrast to the death and destruction she had witnessed. She also practiced with a sword, a skill Tristan had taught her years ago, honing her abilities, preparing herself for the inevitable confrontation with Beaumont. News of Tristan's death had spread quickly, reaching even the remote corners of the kingdom. The official story, as crafted by Beaumont, was that Tristan had died in a tragic accident during the tournament, a victim of his own recklessness. But the truth, as whispered among the common folk, was far different. They spoke of a valiant knight, a hero who had challenged a tyrant, a man who had died fighting for love and justice. Tristan, even in death, had become a symbol of resistance, a beacon of hope for those who yearned for a better world. Eleanor knew that she had to use that momentum, that she had to harness the power of Tristan's legacy to bring Beaumont down. She could not do it alone, however. She needed allies, powerful allies, who could challenge Beaumont's authority and expose his crimes. She sent Agnes to the neighboring lordships, carrying secret messages, seeking support, appealing to their sense of honor and justice. It was a dangerous mission, fraught with peril, but Agnes, ever loyal, ever resourceful, managed to evade Beaumont's spies and reach her intended targets. The response was slow, hesitant, but gradually, cautiously, support began to materialize. Several lords, disgusted by Beaumont's tyranny and moved by Tristan's sacrifice, pledged their aid, promising to provide men and resources for a rebellion. But the key to Eleanor's plan lay in uncovering a secret, a dark truth about Beaumont that would shatter his reputation and turn his own allies against him. She had suspected for some time that Beaumont was not the man he appeared to be, that beneath his veneer of nobility lay a heart of darkness. She remembered a conversation she had overheard between Beaumont and his seneschal, a hushed discussion of a hidden chamber, a secret vault where Beaumont kept his most valuable possessions, his darkest secrets. She knew she had to find that chamber, to uncover the truth about Beaumont, to expose him for the monster he truly was. One evening, as a storm raged outside, mirroring the tempest within her soul, Eleanor decided to act. She donned a dark cloak, concealing her identity, and slipped out of the cottage, making her way towards Ashbourne Castle. The castle was heavily guarded, but Eleanor, with her intimate knowledge of its secret passages and hidden corridors, managed to evade the patrols and enter the castle undetected. She made her way to Beaumont's private chambers, the place where she suspected the secret chamber was located. The rooms were lavishly decorated, a testament to Beaumont's wealth and power, but they held no warmth, no comfort, only a chilling sense of emptiness. She searched the chambers, her hands trembling, her heart pounding in her chest. She examined the walls, the tapestries, the furniture, seeking any sign of a hidden door, a secret passage. And then she found it. Behind a large tapestry depicting a scene of a hunting party, she discovered a small, almost imperceptible crack in the wall. She pressed against it, and a section of the wall swung inward, revealing a narrow, dark passage. She lit a small lantern she had brought with her and stepped into the passage, her heart filled with a mixture of fear and anticipation. The passage led to a small, stone chamber, its walls lined with shelves filled with dusty tomes and ancient artifacts. In the center of the chamber stood a large, iron chest, its lid secured with a heavy lock. This was it. This was Beaumont's secret vault. Eleanor tried to open the chest, but the lock was too strong. She searched the chamber, seeking a key, a tool, anything she could use to force it open. And then she saw it. Hanging on the wall, amidst a collection of ancient weapons, was a small, ornate dagger, its hilt encrusted with jewels. She recognized it immediately. It was Tristan's dagger, the one he had always carried with him, the one he had given to her as a token of his love. A wave of emotion washed over her, a mixture of grief, anger, and a fierce determination. She took the dagger from the wall, her fingers tracing the familiar contours of its hilt. She used the dagger to pry open the lock on the chest, the metal scraping against metal, a sound that echoed through the silent chamber. She lifted the lid and peered inside. The chest was filled with documents, scrolls, and letters, all carefully organized and labeled. Eleanor began to read, her eyes scanning the pages, her heart pounding with anticipation. And then she found it. A letter, written in Beaumont's own hand, detailing a conspiracy, a plot to assassinate the king and seize the throne. The unveiling was complete. Beaumont was not just a tyrant, he was a traitor, a man who would stop at nothing to achieve his ambitions. Eleanor had the evidence she needed. She had the proof of Beaumont's crimes. She had the key to his downfall. Chapter 12. A Knight's Confession. Eleanor carefully gathered the incriminating documents, placing them in a small satchel she had brought with her. She knew she had to get them to safety, to the lords who had pledged their support, to the king himself. As she turned to leave the chamber, a voice startled her. "Looking for something, my lady?" She whirled around, her heart leaping into her throat. Standing in the doorway, his face illuminated by the flickering lantern light, was not Beaumont, as she had feared, but a figure she thought she would never see again. It was Tristan. He was alive. He was here. For a moment, Eleanor could only stare, her mind unable to comprehend what her eyes were seeing. He was pale and thin, his left arm in a sling, a bandage wrapped around his head. But his eyes, those dark, intense eyes that she had loved so dearly, were fixed on her, filled with a mixture of relief, concern, and something else. Something she could not quite decipher. "Tristan?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "But how?" I saw you fall." He moved closer, his steps slow and deliberate. "Beaumont's sword struck me." "Yes," he said, his voice hoarse. "But it did not kill me. His men, they thought I was dead. They left me for the vultures." "But who saved you?" Eleanor asked, her mind still reeling. "My own men," Tristan replied. "The ones who had infiltrated the tournament. They carried me away, tended to my wounds, hid me until I was strong enough to return." Eleanor felt a wave of emotion wash over her, a mixture of joy, relief, and a lingering sense of disbelief. She had mourned him. She had grieved for him. She had believed he was lost to her forever. And yet, here he was, standing before her alive. I thought I had lost you," she said, her voice choked with tears. He reached out, his hand gently cupping her cheek. His touch, as always, sent a shiver of longing through her. "You will never lose me, Eleanor," he said, his voice soft and tender. "I swore an oath to you, and I intend to keep it." She leaned into his touch, savoring the warmth of his hand against her skin. She wanted to embrace him, to hold him tight, to never let him go. But there was something in his eyes, a shadow of doubt, a hint of uncertainty, that held her back. "What is it, Tristan?" she asked, her voice filled with concern. "What is wrong?" He hesitated, his gaze dropping to the floor. "I saw you, Eleanor," he said, his voice low and strained. "At the wedding. I saw you marry Beaumont." Eleanor's heart sank. Of course. He had seen her. He had witnessed her betrayal, her surrender to Beaumont's demands. He did not know the truth. He did not know that she had done it to save his life. "Tristan," she began, her voice pleading. I had to. He threatened to kill you if I refused." He looked up at her, his eyes searching her face, questioning. "Is that true, Eleanor?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Did you do it for me?" "I did it for you," Eleanor confirmed, her voice firm and unwavering. "I would have done anything to save your life. Even marry a man I despise." A flicker of relief crossed his face, but the doubts still lingered. "But you said the vows," he said. "You swore an oath to him." "Words, Tristan," Eleanor said. "Empty words, spoken under duress. My heart belongs to you, and it always will." He stepped closer, his arms wrapping around her, holding her tight. She buried her face in his chest, breathing in the familiar scent of leather and steel, finding comfort in his strength, in his presence. "I believe you, Eleanor," he said, his voice muffled against her hair. "I trust you." He kissed her then, a long, passionate kiss that erased all doubt, all uncertainty, all the pain and suffering they had endured. It was a kiss of forgiveness, of reconciliation, of a love that had survived the ultimate test. But their reunion was short-lived. They had a mission to complete, a tyrant to overthrow, a kingdom to save. "We must go," Eleanor said, pulling away from him, her eyes shining with determination. "I have proof of Beaumont's treachery. We must get it to the king." Tristan nodded, his face grim. "We will ride together, Eleanor," he said, "as we always should have." They left the secret chamber, their hands clasped tightly together, their hearts filled with a renewed sense of hope, of purpose. They had faced death, betrayal, and despair, and they had emerged stronger, their love tempered by fire, their bond unbreakable. They were ready to face whatever lay ahead, together. They were ready to fight for their love, for their future, for their kingdom. Chapter 13. The Lion and the Dove. The ride to the king's court was a perilous one, fraught with a constant threat of discovery. Eleanor and Tristan, disguised as simple travelers, avoided the main roads, sticking to the hidden paths and byways, relying on the network of loyal supporters that Tristan had established. They traveled mostly at night, resting during the day in secluded forests and abandoned shelters, their conversations hushed and urgent. They discussed their plans, their strategies, their hopes for the future. Eleanor shared the contents of Beaumont's secret documents with Tristan, revealing the full extent of his treachery, his plot to assassinate the king and seize the throne. Tristan, already enraged by Beaumont's cruelty and his treatment of Eleanor, was further incensed by this revelation, his resolve to bring him to justice hardening with each passing day. They also spoke of their love, of the pain of their separation, of the joy of their reunion. They confessed their fears, their doubts, their lingering insecurities. They reaffirmed their commitment to each other, their promise to build a life together, a life free from fear and oppression. As they neared the king's court, they were met by a contingent of knights, loyal to the lords who had pledged their support to Eleanor and Tristan. They escorted them the rest of the way, providing protection and ensuring their safe arrival. The king's court was a hive of activity, a place of intrigue and political maneuvering. Eleanor and Tristan, still disguised, were ushered into a private chamber where they awaited an audience with the king. They were not alone. Several of the lords who had supported them were present, their faces grim and determined. They greeted Eleanor and Tristan with respect, acknowledging their courage and their sacrifice. Finally, the moment arrived. They were summoned to the king's presence. King Alaric was an aging monarch, his once powerful frame now weakened by illness, his face etched with the burdens of his reign. But his eyes, though tired, still held a spark of intelligence and authority. Eleanor and Tristan knelt before him, offering their respects. "Your Majesty," Eleanor began, her voice clear and strong. "We have come to you with grave news. We have evidence of a conspiracy, a plot to overthrow your rule and seize the throne." She presented the documents she had taken from Beaumont's secret chamber, outlining his treachery in detail. The king examined the documents, his expression growing increasingly grave. "This is outrageous," he said, his voice trembling with anger. "Lord Beaumont a traitor? I cannot believe it." "It is true, your majesty," Tristan said, his voice firm. "I have witnessed his cruelty firsthand. He is a ruthless and ambitious man who will stop at nothing to achieve his goals." The king looked at Tristan, his eyes scrutinizing. "And who are you, Sir Knight?" he asked. "You're a stranger to me." Tristan removed his disguise, revealing his true identity. "I am Tristan de Warwick, your majesty," he said, "a knight of your realm and a loyal servant of the crown." The king recognized him then, remembering the reports of his bravery in the war, his supposed death at the tournament. "Sir Tristan," he said, his voice filled with surprise. "You are alive? We were told you had perished." "Beaumont spread lies, your majesty," Tristan replied, "to cover his own crimes." The king listened intently as Eleanor and Tristan recounted their story, their escape from Ashbourne, Beaumont's pursuit, Tristan's near-death experience, and their subsequent efforts to gather evidence and seek support. The king was deeply moved by their tale, by their courage, their loyalty, and their love for each other. He was also enraged by Beaumont's treachery, by his betrayal of the trust that had been placed in him. "Lord Beaumont will be brought to justice," the king declared, his voice firm and resolute. "He will answer for his crimes. And you, Sir Tristan and Lady Eleanor, will be rewarded for your loyalty and your service." He ordered Beaumont's arrest, sending a detachment of royal guards to Ashbourne Castle to apprehend him. He also publicly acknowledged Tristan's survival and his service to the crown, restoring his lands and titles, and recognizing his rightful claim to Eleanor's hand. Eleanor and Tristan were overjoyed. Their ordeal was finally over. Justice would be served, and they would be free to be together. But their joy was tempered by a sense of caution. They knew that Beaumont was a dangerous man, a man with powerful allies. They knew that the fight was not yet over. A lion cornered, or a dove freed. It was an image of contrast, of strength, and of the soft hope. Yet, the battle to be truly free still lay ahead. Chapter 14. Trials of Faith. Beaumont, upon learning of the king's decree and Tristan's survival, did not surrender meekly. He barricaded himself within Ashbourne Castle, gathering his loyal men at arms and preparing for a siege. He refused to believe that his carefully laid plans had been foiled, that his ambition had been thwarted by a woman he had considered weak and a knight he had believed dead. The king, unwilling to risk a prolonged and bloody conflict, sent Eleanor and Tristan back to Ashbourne, accompanied by a royal army, to negotiate Beaumont's surrender. He hoped that Eleanor's presence, her ability to appeal to the reason and loyalty of the castle garrison, would prevent unnecessary bloodshed. The journey back to Ashbourne was filled with a mixture of anticipation and dread. Eleanor, once a prisoner within those walls, was now returning as a liberator, a symbol of hope for those who had suffered under Beaumont's tyranny. But she also knew that Beaumont was a desperate man, a man capable of unspeakable cruelty. She feared for the safety of her people, for the lives of the soldiers who would be forced to fight if negotiations failed. Tristan, riding beside her, shared her concerns. He had faced Beaumont in battle before, and he knew the measure of his ruthlessness, his willingness to sacrifice anything and anyone to achieve his goals. He was determined to protect Eleanor, to ensure that she came to no harm, but he also knew that the coming confrontation would be a test of their strength, their courage, and their faith. As they approached Ashbourne Castle, the sight of its imposing walls, its battlements bristling with armed men, sent a shiver of apprehension down Eleanor's spine. The castle, once her home, now felt like a fortress of evil, a symbol of the oppression she had endured. They set up camp outside the castle walls, sending a messenger to Beaumont, demanding his surrender and offering him a fair trial before the king. Beaumont's response was swift and defiant. He refused to surrender, claiming his innocence and accusing Eleanor and Tristan of treason. Negotiations were clearly futile. A siege was inevitable. Eleanor, despite her fear, insisted on addressing the castle garrison directly. She stood before the main gate, her voice amplified by a herald, appealing to their sense of honor, their loyalty to Ashbourne, and their duty to the king. "Men of Ashbourne," she cried, "I am Eleanor, your rightful lady. I have returned to reclaim my home, to free you from the tyranny of Lord Beaumont. He is a traitor, a man who has plotted against the king and betrayed your trust. Lay down your arms, and you will be spared. Resist, and you will face the consequences of your actions." Her words hung in the air, the silence that followed deafening. Eleanor held her breath, her heart pounding in her chest, praying that her plea would be heard, that her people would choose reason over violence. Then, a single voice rose from within the castle walls. "We stand with Lady Eleanor." The cry was taken up by others, spreading through the ranks of the garrison, until the entire castle seemed to echo with their defiance. The gates of Ashbourne Castle swung open, and the men-at-arms, casting aside their weapons, emerged, pledging their allegiance to Eleanor and the king. Beaumont's support had crumbled. He was alone, abandoned by his own men, his dreams of power shattered. He was found in the great hall, seated on his throne, his face a mask of defeat and despair. He did not resist as the royal guards took him into custody, his reign of terror finally at an end. Eleanor entered the castle, her heart filled with a mixture of relief and sadness. She had reclaimed her home, but the scars of Beaumont's tyranny, the memory of Tristan's supposed death, would remain with her forever. The trials of her faith had been severe. Belief had been tested in loyalty and love, duty and hope. But amidst it all, she found the core was sound. She walked through the familiar halls, her steps echoing through the silent chambers. She visited the chapel, the library, the gardens, each place filled with memories, both joyful and painful. She stood before the tapestry, the one depicting the founding of Ashbourne, the one with the hidden rose, Tristan's family crest. She traced the outline of the rose, her fingers lingering on the embroidered falcon, the symbol of her own lineage. The lion and the dove. Strength and gentleness. Power and love. They were not opposites, but complements, two sides of the same coin. She had learned that lesson through hardship and sacrifice, through loss and redemption. She had found her strength, her courage, her faith. She was ready to face the future, whatever it may hold. She was ready to rule Ashbourne, to rebuild her home, to create a better world for her people. Chapter 15. The Gathering Storm. Beaumont's capture and the liberation of Ashbourne were celebrated throughout the kingdom. He was brought before the king, tried for treason, and found guilty. His lands and titles were stripped from him, and he was sentenced to life imprisonment in the royal dungeons. Eleanor and Tristan, hailed as heroes, were showered with honors and accolades. The king publicly recognized their marriage, bestowing upon them his blessing and granting them additional lands and privileges. But their happiness was tempered by a growing unease. The conspiracy that Beaumont had been a part of was far more extensive than they had initially realized. He had not acted alone. There were others, powerful nobles within the king's own court, who had supported his plot to seize the throne. These conspirators, now exposed and fearful of the consequences of their actions, began to plot their own rebellion, seeking to overthrow the king and install a puppet ruler who would be more amenable to their interests. The king, weakened by illness and increasingly reliant on the counsel of his advisors, was slow to recognize the danger. He was reluctant to believe that those he had trusted, those who had served him for years, could be capable of such treachery. Eleanor and Tristan, however, were not so naive. They had seen firsthand the depths of human depravity, the lengths to which some would go to achieve their ambitions. They urged the king to take action, to root out the conspirators and crush their rebellion before it could gain momentum. But the king hesitated, swayed by the assurances of his advisors, many of whom were secretly in league with the rebels. He ordered an investigation, but he was slow to authorize any arrests, fearing that he would alienate powerful factions within the court. This delay proved to be a costly mistake. The conspirators, emboldened by the king's inaction, began to openly defy his authority, gathering their forces and preparing for war. The kingdom was on the brink of civil war, a conflict that threatened to tear apart the fabric of society and plunge the land into chaos. Eleanor and Tristan, frustrated by the king's indecisiveness, decided to take matters into their own hands. They gathered their own loyal forces, drawing upon the support of the lords who had pledged their aid during their escape from Ashbourne. They established a base of operations at a strategically located fortress, preparing for the inevitable conflict. They also sent messengers to the various regions of the kingdom, appealing to the common folk, the knights, and the lords who remained loyal to the king, urging them to join their cause and defend the realm against the traitors. The response was overwhelming. Thousands flocked to their banner, inspired by their courage, their loyalty, and their love for each other. They saw in Eleanor and Tristan a symbol of hope, a promise of a better future, a future free from tyranny and oppression. As the storm clouds of war gathered, Eleanor and Tristan stood side by side, their love a beacon of light in the darkness. They knew that the coming conflict would be a test of their strength, their courage, and their faith. They knew that many lives would be lost, that the kingdom would be scarred by violence and destruction. But they were not afraid. They were prepared to fight for what they believed in, for their love, for their kingdom, for their future. They were the lion and the dove, strength and gentleness, power and love, united against a common enemy. They knew that the odds were stacked against them, that the rebels were powerful and well organized. But they also knew that they had something the rebels did not have: the support of the people, the blessing of the king, and the unwavering belief in their own righteousness. As the first clashes of the war began, Eleanor and Tristan rode at the head of their army, their banners flying high, their hearts filled with a mixture of fear and determination. They were ready to face the storm, to fight for their kingdom, to defend their love. The gathering storm was upon them, and they were ready to meet it, head-on, together. Chapter 16. Blood on the Fields. The first major battle of the war took place on the fields of Eldoria, a vast expanse of rolling hills and fertile farmland that would soon be stained with blood. Eleanor and Tristan, leading their army of loyalists, faced a rebel force that was larger and better equipped, but lacked the unity of purpose and the moral conviction of their opponents. The battle began at dawn, the rising sun casting a golden glow over the assembled armies, their armor gleaming, their banners fluttering in the breeze. The air was thick with tension, the silence broken only by the occasional whinny of a horse, the clang of a sword, the muttered prayers of soldiers preparing for the inevitable clash. Eleanor, clad in a suit of light armor, rode beside Tristan at the head of their forces, her presence a source of inspiration for her troops. She had insisted on joining the battle, refusing to remain behind in safety while others risked their lives for her cause. She was not just a lady, a figurehead, but a warrior, a leader, a symbol of hope for her people. Tristan, his face grim and determined, gave the order to advance. The loyalist army surged forward, a wave of steel and courage, their battle cry echoing across the fields. For the king, for Ashbourne, for Eleanor. The rebel forces met them head-on, their own battle cry a roar of defiance and ambition. For freedom, for justice, for a new order. The two armies clashed with a deafening roar, the sound of steel meeting steel, the screams of the wounded, the thunder of hooves, creating a cacophony of violence and destruction. Eleanor fought with a courage and skill that surprised even Tristan. She wielded her sword with precision and determination, defending herself against the rebel soldiers who dared to challenge her. She was not just fighting for her kingdom, she was fighting for her love, for her future, for the memory of all those who had suffered under the tyranny of the conspirators. Tristan, as always, was a force to be reckoned with. He fought with the ferocity of a lion, his sword a blur of silver, cutting down enemy after enemy. He sought out the leaders of the rebellion, the nobles who had betrayed the king, determined to bring them to justice. The battle raged for hours, the tide turning one way and then the other. The fields of Eldoria were littered with the bodies of the dead and dying, the ground soaked with blood, the air filled with the stench of death. Eleanor witnessed the horrors of war firsthand, the brutality, the senselessness, the waste of human life. She saw men she knew, men who had served her faithfully, fall before her eyes, their lives cut short by the cruelty of conflict. She felt a surge of anger, of grief, of determination. She would not let this war continue. She would not let more lives be lost. She would find a way to end it, to bring peace back to her kingdom. As the day wore on, the loyalist forces, despite being outnumbered, began to gain the upper hand. Their unity of purpose, their belief in their cause, their love for Eleanor and Tristan, gave them a strength that the rebels could not match. The rebel lines began to waver, their resolve crumbling under the relentless pressure of the loyalist attack. The rebel leaders, seeing their defeat imminent, attempted to flee the battlefield, but Tristan and his knights pursued them, capturing them one by one. Finally, as the sun began to set, the rebel army broke and fled, their dreams of conquest shattered, their rebellion crushed. The loyalists had won the battle, but the victory was bittersweet. The fields of Eldoria were a scene of carnage, a testament to the horrors of war. Thousands lay dead, their lives sacrificed in the name of ambition and greed. Eleanor and Tristan, exhausted but victorious, rode through the battlefield, surveying the devastation, their hearts filled with a mixture of relief and sorrow. They had won a major battle, but the war was far from over. There were still other rebel strongholds to conquer, other conspirators to bring to justice. But for now, they could savor their victory, a victory that had been hard-won, a victory that had been paid for in blood. They had proven their strength, their courage, their loyalty. They had defended their kingdom, their love, their future. The blood on the fields of Eldoria was a grim reminder of the cost of war, but it was also a symbol of hope, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, the enduring power of love and loyalty. Chapter 17. Echoes of War. The victory at Eldoria was a turning point in the war, but it did not end the conflict. Pockets of resistance remained, led by ambitious nobles who refused to surrender their dreams of power. The kingdom, though largely secured, was still scarred by the violence and destruction of the rebellion. Eleanor and Tristan, weary but resolute, continued their campaign, marching from one stronghold to another, quelling rebellions, restoring order, and dispensing justice. They were greeted as liberators in many towns and villages, the people cheering their arrival, grateful for their protection and their commitment to restoring peace. But the echoes of war continued to haunt them. The memories of the fallen, the suffering of the wounded, the devastation of the land, weighed heavily on their hearts. They had witnessed firsthand the horrors of conflict, the senselessness of violence, the fragility of human life. Eleanor, in particular, struggled with the aftermath of the war. She had seen too much death, too much suffering. She had fought bravely, she had led her people to victory, but the cost had been high. She found herself plagued by nightmares, haunted by the faces of the men she had killed, the cries of the wounded, the stench of blood and death. Tristan, seeing her suffering, did his best to comfort her, to reassure her, to help her heal. He shared his own experiences, his own struggles with the horrors of war, his own doubts and fears. He reminded her of the good they had accomplished, the lives they had saved, the tyranny they had overthrown. He also encouraged her to focus on the future, on rebuilding the kingdom, on creating a better world for their people. He urged her to use her position, her power, her influence, to heal the wounds of war, to promote peace and reconciliation. Eleanor, drawing strength from Tristan's love and support, gradually began to find a measure of peace. She threw herself into the work of rebuilding, overseeing the reconstruction of damaged towns and villages, providing aid to the needy, and establishing new laws to ensure justice and fairness for all. She also established a council of advisors, composed of representatives from all regions of the kingdom, both nobles and commoners, to help her govern wisely and justly. She listened to their counsel, valued their opinions, and sought to create a government that was truly representative of the people. One of the most significant challenges they faced was dealing with the aftermath of the rebellion, bringing the remaining conspirators to justice, while also seeking to heal the divisions within the kingdom. Eleanor and Tristan insisted on fair trials for all those accused of treason, refusing to resort to summary executions or vengeful punishments. They sought to balance justice with mercy, to punish the guilty while also offering a path to redemption for those who were willing to repent and pledge their loyalty to the crown. This approach was not always popular, particularly among those who had suffered directly under the rebels' tyranny. Some demanded harsher punishments, swifter justice, a more complete reckoning for the crimes that had been committed. But Eleanor and Tristan stood firm, believing that true justice required not only punishment, but also reconciliation, that the only way to heal the wounds of war was to build a society based on fairness, compassion, and respect for the rule of law. As the months passed, the kingdom slowly began to recover. Fields were replanted, towns rebuilt, trade routes reopened. The echoes of war still lingered, but they were gradually fading, replaced by the sounds of life, of laughter, of hope. Eleanor and Tristan, working together, had not only won the war, but they were also winning the peace. They were proving that strength and gentleness, power and love, could coexist, that a kingdom could be built not on fear and oppression, but on justice, compassion, and unity. They had faced the storm, and they had emerged stronger, their love tempered by fire, their bond unbreakable. Chapter 18. A love forged in fire. Years passed, and the scars of war slowly faded, replaced by the gentle patina of peace and prosperity. Ashbourne Castle, once a symbol of oppression and fear, was transformed into a beacon of hope and justice, its walls echoing with laughter and music instead of screams and cries of despair. Eleanor and Tristan ruled wisely and justly, their love for each other a constant source of strength and inspiration. They had learned the harsh lessons of war, the fragility of life, the importance of compassion, and the enduring power of love. They had no children of their own, a source of quiet sadness for Eleanor, but they poured their love and attention into the children of Ashbourne, treating them as their own, ensuring that they grew up in a world free from the tyranny and violence that had marked their own lives. They established schools, hospitals, and orphanages, providing education, healthcare, and shelter for those in need. They fostered trade and commerce, creating opportunities for their people to prosper and thrive. They reformed the laws, ensuring that justice was administered fairly and impartially, regardless of social status or wealth. Eleanor, once a pawn in a game of power and politics, had become a powerful and respected ruler in her own right. She was known for her wisdom, her compassion, her unwavering commitment to justice. She was a queen in all but name, her influence extending far beyond the borders of Ashbourne. Tristan, no longer the landless knight, the forgotten hero, was her constant companion, her advisor, her protector, her love. He had put aside his sword, but he remained a warrior at heart, always ready to defend his wife, his people, and his kingdom. Their love, forged in the fires of war and tested by the trials of fate, had endured, stronger and deeper than ever. They had faced death, betrayal, and despair, and they had emerged victorious, their bond unbreakable. They often walked together in the castle gardens, hand in hand, their silence filled with a comfortable understanding, a shared history, a deep and abiding love. They would sit beneath the old oak tree, the place where they had first declared their love, the place where they had made their vows, the place where they had planned their escape. The tree, a symbol of their enduring love, stood tall and strong, its branches reaching up to the heavens, its roots firmly planted in the earth. It had witnessed their joys and sorrows, their triumphs and defeats, their unwavering commitment to each other. One evening, as the sun set, casting a golden glow over the castle and the surrounding countryside, Eleanor and Tristan sat beneath the oak tree, their hands clasped tightly together. "Do you remember?" Eleanor said softly, her voice filled with a mixture of nostalgia and contentment, "when we first met here as children?" Tristan smiled, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "How could I forget?" he replied. "You were a wild thing, a tomboy, always climbing trees and getting into trouble. And you were the serious knight," Eleanor teased, "always so proper and dutiful." "Someone had to be," Tristan chuckled. You were always running headlong into danger. And you were always there to rescue me, Eleanor said, her voice softening. Always, Tristan confirmed, his gaze locking with hers. And I always will be. He leaned in and kissed her, a gentle, tender kiss that spoke volumes of their enduring love, their shared history, their unbreakable bond. It was a kiss that transcended time, that defied fate, that celebrated a love that had conquered all. As they sat there, beneath the watchful gaze of the stars, their love a beacon of hope in a world that often seemed dark and uncertain, they knew that they had built something special, something lasting, something that would endure long after they were gone. They had built a kingdom, not just of stone and mortar, but of love, of justice, of compassion. They had forged a love, not just in the fires of war, but in the crucible of life, a love that was strong, resilient, and unbreakable. It was a story for the ages, a story of love, so deep, so true. Chapter 19. The Queen's Gambit. Despite the peace and prosperity that Eleanor and Tristan had brought to Ashbourne and the surrounding lands, a shadow of unease lingered. King Alaric, though grateful for their service and their loyalty, remained weakened by illness and increasingly susceptible to the whispers of ambitious courtiers who sought to undermine Eleanor and Tristan's influence. These courtiers, remnants of the old conspiracy and jealous of Eleanor and Tristan's popularity, spread rumors and innuendo, questioning their loyalty, suggesting that they harbored ambitions for the throne itself. They played upon the king's fears, his insecurities, his growing paranoia, planting seeds of doubt in his mind. Eleanor and Tristan were aware of these machinations, but they chose to ignore them, focusing instead on governing Ashbourne and serving the king faithfully. They believed that their actions, their loyalty, their commitment to the realm, would speak for themselves. However, the whispers grew louder, the accusations more blatant. The courtiers, emboldened by the king's silence, began to openly challenge Eleanor and Tristan's authority, questioning their decisions, undermining their policies. The situation came to a head when the king, acting on the advice of his courtiers, summoned Eleanor and Tristan to the royal court to answer charges of disrespect. It was a thinly veiled accusation of treason, a test of their loyalty, a trap designed to discredit them and remove them from power. Eleanor and Tristan, though angered by this injustice, agreed to attend the court, confident that they could refute the charges and expose the treachery of their accusers. They arrived at the royal court, not as supplicants, but as equals, their heads held high, their demeanor confident and resolute. They were greeted with coldness and hostility by the courtiers, with suspicion and uncertainty by the king. The king, seated on his throne, his face pale and drawn, addressed them formally. "Lady Eleanor, Sir Tristan," he said, his voice weak and strained. "You have been summoned here to answer charges of disrespect against the crown. It is said that you have acted independently, that you have defied my authority, that you have ambitions beyond your station." Eleanor stepped forward, her voice clear and strong. "Your Majesty," she said, "these charges are false and baseless. We have always served you faithfully and loyally. We have fought for your kingdom. We have defended your throne. We have risked our lives for your safety. Our actions speak for themselves." Tristan added, "We have never sought power or position. Our only desire is to serve you and the realm to the best of our abilities." The courtiers, however, presented their evidence, a series of twisted facts, fabricated incidents, and outright lies, designed to portray Eleanor and Tristan as ambitious and disloyal. They spoke of their popularity, of their influence, of their independent actions, suggesting that they were plotting to overthrow the king and seize the throne for themselves. The king, swayed by the courtiers' arguments and his own growing paranoia, seemed inclined to believe them. He questioned Eleanor and Tristan closely, his tone accusatory, his demeanor increasingly hostile. Eleanor and Tristan defended themselves vigorously, refuting the charges, exposing the lies, and challenging the motives of their accusers. But the court was stacked against them, the courtiers determined to see them disgraced and removed from power. It was a queen's gambit, a daring and dangerous move, But Eleanor knew she had no choice. She had to protect her husband, her people, and her kingdom. As the proceedings reached a climax, Eleanor played her final card. She revealed a secret she had kept hidden for years, a secret that would change everything. "Your Majesty," she said, her voice ringing out across the silent court. "There is something you do not know, something that has been kept from you for far too long." She paused, her gaze sweeping across the assembled courtiers, their faces a mixture of anticipation and apprehension. "I am with child," she declared. "I carry the heir to Ashbourne, the future of our line." A gasp went up from the court. The courtiers were stunned into silence. The king stared at her, his eyes wide with disbelief. Eleanor's revelation changed the entire dynamic of the proceedings. She was no longer just a powerful noblewoman, a potential threat to the throne. She was the mother of the future heir, a symbol of hope and continuity for the kingdom. It was suddenly not just a move of defense. It was a securing of the future, not just for them, but the realm. The courtiers' accusations suddenly seemed petty and insignificant, their plot to discredit her exposed as a desperate and foolish gamble. The king, his mind finally clear, saw the truth. He had been manipulated, deceived by his own advisors, nearly driven to destroy the very people who had saved his kingdom. He dismissed the charges against Eleanor and Tristan, ordering the arrest of the leading conspirators. He publicly apologized to Eleanor and Tristan, reaffirming his trust in them and acknowledging their invaluable service to the crown. The Queen's gambit had worked. Eleanor had saved herself, her husband, and her kingdom, not with force, but with truth, with love, with the promise of a new generation. Chapter 20. The Reckoning of Love and Duty. The revelation of Eleanor's pregnancy and the subsequent collapse of the conspiracy against them ushered in a new era of stability and prosperity for the kingdom. The king, finally free from the influence of the treacherous courtiers, relied increasingly on Eleanor and Tristan's counsel, recognizing their wisdom, their loyalty, and their unwavering commitment to the realm. The remaining conspirators were brought to justice, their plots exposed, their ambitions thwarted. The kingdom, once on the brink of civil war, was united once more, its people grateful for the peace and security that Eleanor and Tristan had restored. As Eleanor's pregnancy progressed, she continued to govern Ashbourne with her usual efficiency and compassion, earning the love and respect of her people. Tristan remained by her side, his devotion unwavering, his protection absolute. The birth of their child, a healthy son, was greeted with joyous celebrations throughout the kingdom. They named him Arthur, a name that evoked images of courage, chivalry, and just rule, a name that symbolized their hopes for the future. The king, overjoyed at the arrival of a potential heir should his own line fail, declared Arthur a royal prince, further solidifying the bond between Ashbourne and the crown. As Arthur grew, Eleanor and Tristan instilled in him the values they held dear: justice, compassion, courage, and loyalty. They taught him the importance of duty, the responsibilities of leadership, and the enduring power of love. Years passed, and the kingdom flourished under their wise and just rule. The scars of war had long since healed, replaced by a vibrant and prosperous society. Ashbourne Castle, once a symbol of oppression, was now a center of learning, culture, and diplomacy, its halls filled with the laughter of children, the wisdom of scholars, and the music of bards. Eleanor and Tristan, though aging, remained deeply in love, their bond strengthened by the trials they had faced, the victories they had won, the love they shared. They had built a kingdom, not just of stone and mortar, but of hearts and minds, a kingdom founded on the principles of justice, compassion, and unity. One evening, as they sat together on the battlements of Ashbourne Castle, watching the sun set over their beloved kingdom, Eleanor turned to Tristan, her eyes filled with a deep and abiding love. "We have come a long way, my love," she said softly, her voice laced with contentment. Tristan smiled, his hand reaching out to clasp hers. "We have," he agreed, "and we have done it together." "We faced so much," Eleanor continued, her gaze sweeping across the landscape, the rolling hills, the fertile fields, the bustling towns, all testaments to their enduring legacy. So much pain, so much loss, so much uncertainty. But we never gave up, Tristan said, his voice firm. We never lost faith in each other, in our love, in our duty. And we built something beautiful, Eleanor said, her eyes shining with pride. Something lasting. Something worth fighting for, Tristan added. They fell silent, their hands clasped tightly together, their hearts filled with gratitude and love. They had lived a life of adventure, of challenge, of triumph. They had faced their demons, conquered their fears, and fulfilled their destinies. They had proven that love and duty, strength and gentleness, power and compassion could coexist, that a kingdom could be built not on fear and oppression, but on justice, unity, and hope. The reckoning of love and duty had been made, and they had found a balance, a harmony, a perfect union of heart and mind, of spirit and soul. They had created a legacy that would endure for generations to come, a legacy of love, of courage, of justice. The sun dipped below the horizon, and a peaceful quiet held the land. Epilogue. They often walked in the castle gardens, reminiscing about their adventures, their challenges, their triumphs, and the enduring love that had bound them together. One crisp autumn evening, as the leaves turned golden and the air grew crisp, Eleanor and Tristan sat beneath the old oak tree, their favorite spot, the place where their love story had begun. They were old now, their bodies frail, their steps slow, but their hearts remained young, their love as strong and vibrant as it had ever been. Eleanor, her hand resting gently on Tristan's arm, looked out over the landscape, the rolling hills, the fertile fields, the bustling towns, all testaments to the life they had built together. We did well, my love, she said softly, her voice filled with contentment. Tristan smiled, his eyes crinkling at the corners. We did, he agreed. We built a good life, a good kingdom. And we loved each other, Eleanor added, her voice trembling slightly. With all our hearts, with all our souls. Always, Tristan confirmed, his gaze locking with hers. And forever. He leaned in and kissed her, a gentle, tender kiss that spoke volumes of their enduring love, their shared history, their unbreakable bond. It was a kiss that transcended time, that defied fate, that celebrated a love that had conquered all. As they sat there, beneath the watchful gaze of the stars, their love a beacon of hope in a world that often seemed dark and uncertain, they felt a sense of peace, of completion, of fulfillment. They had lived a full life, a life of purpose, a life of love. Eleanor rested her head on Tristan's shoulder, her eyes closing peacefully. She felt his hand gently stroking her hair, his presence a comforting warmth beside her. And as the moon rose high in the sky, casting its silvery light over the land, Eleanor and Tristan, the lion and the dove, slipped away quietly, together, their souls intertwined, their love eternal. They left behind a legacy of courage, of justice, of compassion, a legacy that would inspire generations to come. Their story, a testament to the enduring power of love and duty, would be told and retold, a legend whispered in the halls of Ashbourne Castle, a tale of a knight and his lady, who had faced the storms of life and emerged victorious.